This is Anya Yurchyshyn, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Anya Yurchyshyn.
Thank you for listening to Author Stories. We are now more than 350 episodes in and not slowing down anytime soon. It's because of you, the loyal listeners who tune in each day to Author Stories to hear the best author interviews around, and I just wanted to say thank you. On the right-hand sidebar of the website at hankgarner.com, you can find links where you can subscribe to the show, and it helps other people find the show. The more people subscribe, the higher we go in the rankings, and the easier people find us. I'd like to thank some sponsors this week for helping us bring the show to you. I, your humble host, have a brand new book out. It's called The Pandora Codex. Oliver Weber, Book 1, A Closely Guarded Secret, a Stolen Artifact, and a Madman Trying to Open a Portal to Hell. Can Oliver Weber become the hero he's meant to be? Pick up the Pandora Codex now. It's the first book in the Oliver Weber series. The second book, Jacob's Ladder, comes out very soon. Go ahead, dig into this series. Grab it now. You won't be disappointed. My friend Patricia Gilliam has a new series called Series Craft 101, and she has a series of books, the Fictional Character Creator Workbook, Setting and World Building Workbook. If you are looking to put together a long-running series like Patricia has done, these are some things that she's learned and that she can help you to get on top of that makes managing a long series much easier. Go check it out. There's a link in the show notes, and we'll be talking about it more. Bokera Brumley has a new book called Imani Earns Her Cape. It's a middle grade novel. You might have heard us talk about it on the show just a week or so ago when Bokera was on. A 12-year-old Imani should be celebrating the most important day of her life by eating myrfruit, casting flying spells, and laughing with her mother, but there's just one massive problem. Her mother's been kidnapped by a giant troll, and now Imani is lost in the Fey realm with no way home back to Virginia. Completing her rite of passage alone is inadvisable, but if Imani doesn't want to lose the only family she's ever had, she may have no choice. Transportal train travel, underwater cities, submarines, sea dragons, and unexpected family all combine in Imani Earns Her Cape. Thanks for listening to the show. At the end, as always, we have an audiobook clip from my friend Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
Hey everybody, it's Josh Hayes, and I'm here with Chuck Manley and Scott Moon. We are Keystroke Medium, and this is the Keystroke Medium Minute.
Hey, this is Scott for the Keystroke Minute. I'm here with Josh and Chuck. We're going to talk a little bit about genre burnout. So since this was, well, we'll just start with Chuck. You want to lead us into that and kind of get us set up for what we're talking about here?
I had to deal with recently. I've got a space opera series that's been my work in progress for, I don't know, going on a year now. And I was about 30,000 words into the third book in that series. And I just felt like it was getting a little stale because I was a little tired of those characters in that setting. And I felt like I needed to take a break from it. And I had this idea for an urban fantasy thing bouncing around in my head. So I just shelved the space opera thing and got to work on the urban fantasy thing. And I think what this shows is that you don't necessarily have to stick to one thing and see it through, like if you're having to whip yourself to get there. If you get tired of one genre, put it aside, play with another one for a little while, kind of let your subconscious and the rest of your creative self work on that project you were tired of. Come back to it later and you can have a fresh eyes and a fresh set of enthusiasm for it. So just if you stick with one thing for too long and you feel like you're starting to just get sick of it, it's okay to go ahead and do something else for a little while, as long as you go back and finish what you started in the first place. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think I've felt a lot of this in the last several months working on my Terra Nova series with Richard Fox, and then kind of looking into 2018, visualizing the projects that I have scheduled already. And I think this is the first time in my writing career where I have probably a 6 or 7 or 8 month schedule worth of books that I need to write. And they're all military science fiction. And so I look at that and say, that's a lot of military science fiction, but I really want to write a fantasy. How am I going to do that? And so part of that process goes back to the episode we had a little while ago talking about voice dictation, whereas I'm going to do my main writing at home on my main computer, all the military science fiction stuff until that's done, obviously. And then when I'm out and about at work or, not at the computer, pulling out the phone and doing a little bit of voice dictation, but doing a fantasy story, even if it's just world building or character building or whatever, doing that on my phone or with Dragon Anywhere as an exercise for 2 reasons. One, to practice my voice dictation, but also to kind of play around in this other genre to keep my head kind of processing writing as a whole instead of just focusing on one genre, which I love the genre military science fiction, but I desperately want to write a fantasy. So that's how I'm handling it this year.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I was just I was lost in listening to the your guys' answer. So, but this as the worst possible offender of the multiple projects at one time club, I can talk to this one, and I think that it's very good. The thing is, if you have to choose between, I can't make myself write this story today, and I can write something else, I would choose writing something. Just like Chuck said, sometimes you got to just refresh. It's like cross training for writers. You go get in and do something different, come back fresh. On the other side of that coin, I think you have to be very careful and know yourself as a writer and a person to sometimes when things get hard, you want to do something different. So spend some time figuring out, is this because it's just hard and it's always fun to do the shiny new story. But to finish a book or write that difficult middle sometimes is hard and you got to just push through it. The useful piece of advice I would give with that is that when you do any project, to do it as fast as you possibly can and then clean it up later. Stephen King's famous for talking about that if you don't get the book written in the first 90 days, it's probably going to die. Yep. And you lose your enthusiasm for it. And, it's just, so I think it's absolutely, I know I cannot write without jumping between projects because I'll get burnout on one, but also there is some discipline. So that balance between discipline and just going out and having fun with the writing.
Yep.
Cheese and crackers.
Okay, well, this has been Josh for Chuck and Scott. Thanks for listening to this Keystroke Minute. You can find more of our show at keystrokemedium.com, where we have author interviews and craft discussion and a lot of shenanigans. Come out and hang out with us.
Shenanigans.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Anya Yurchyshyn on the show with me. She has a fantastic new book called My Dead Parents, and this book is in one moment unsettling, in one moment really heartwarming, and I feel like I know Anya already from reading this book. So welcome to the show, Anya.
Thank you so much, Hank. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I don't have a crystal clear memory. I always loved reading, and, I did a lot of hiding as a child, and I talk about this in the book, and, I didn't always hide alone. I hid with books. So, I always had a companion and I could always kind of run off to another world and live there. And that was such a comfort for me. And, becoming a writer myself seemed kind of impossible because something else I talk about in the book was that I, have some kind of basic learning disabilities like dyslexia that made learning to write and read really difficult for me, and I had terrible handwriting, was terrible at spelling. So writing was really kind of an enemy of mine. Anytime I had to write something for school, it always took so much effort and I was never happy with what I produced. And I just thought that, writing was going to be something I could enjoy, but not something that I could actually practice myself, and certainly not kind of elevate to an art or true craft form. But then, once I got the basics down and, learned how to spell or, started using a computer, thank God for spell check. To this day, that's something I really rely on. Once, the basic elements became easier for me, I think I was probably around, 10 when I started writing my own stories and started writing in school. And then in middle school, I had, a really wonderful teacher, Miss Hagney, and I was actually in this class for students who were, I guess not, even though English is my first language, were struggling enough with the basics of English that we were considered not ready to take English or Spanish. So we got an extra English class, which actually was the best thing that could have happened for me, because it, again, allowed me to sharpen my skills and gave me an extra hour in the day where I could write creative things and really just have fun with this thing that was challenging me. And that gave me this extra time that I needed to develop my voice and to believe and, to get encouragement, over something that I loved. So it was, I guess, really middle school when I began to think, okay, doing anything professionally seemed crazy to me, so I, thought I was going to be 12 forever, which honestly was kind of a nightmare. But then I really thought, hey, maybe this is something, that I could be good at with enough practice. And I think that is the secret with writing, that it just takes so much practice, and that remains true. Anything, I'm certainly much more of an accomplished writer now, but anything I write 10 times. That's just how it goes. And that's never going to change, I think.
I kind of have a pet theory, and that theory is that storytellers are born and writers are made. I think you either have that gene that allows you to dream and imagine and conceptualize either made up stories, or to take real life and put those circumstances and experiences into a compelling narrative. But then the actual writing of that becomes the mechanics and the skill take work. And I think you're either a born storyteller or you're not. I don't know that you can teach that, but you can absolutely teach someone who has that innate thing how to be better and better.
I think you're exactly right. If you don't have the impulse to share, because
Right.
that's, you can write for yourself or, enjoy TV or reading, but, when you write, you're really, you're writing, or, certainly when you're writing a book, you're hoping for an audience. So it's the same impulse if you're at a party and you want to tell a great story, and you can make it interesting and make it feel alive for whoever's listening. And then, you kind of have the same responsibility as an author. You may have a great story to tell, but if you don't make it rich for your reader, and you don't go through, all the time and effort it takes to refine that story and discover the best way to pace it and to share it, then you're not fulfilling your obligations to your audience. And that's something that I think is really important. Not every person is going to love every book. We all have our tastes. We all have a genre that we might gravitate towards, but your responsibility as a writer is to do right by your reader. And I think that takes an enormous amount of discipline and trial and error, and, figuring out what this particular story requires from you.
You said that you gravitated toward books when you were younger, and you were kind of that they were your friends and your safe place and your, that, you know, disappear into books when you needed a place to go. What sorts of stories did you really gravitate toward?
Gosh, I mean, so many. You know, I absolutely loved the Chronicles of Narnia. You know, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a standard for everyone, but even the rest of the series, I think, you know, Voyage of the Dawn Treader was one I probably read, you know, 200 times. Prince Caspian, you know, I just fell in love with these characters, and they, you know, they were really real to me, and they were living my dream. You know, my version of Narnia was, you know, this book I could disappear into, but you know, these characters really were, you know, traveling through, you know, a wardrobe or a closet and finding this, you know, entirely wild other world. And I think, you know, that, you know, it's such an easy trick, you know, oh, we're gonna disappear into a closet, and as we push through behind these coats, like, oh my gosh, there's snow on the ground, you know, that's every child's dream, you know, that there's kind of magic lurking, you know, behind every corner and every shadow. And, you know, I remember during long car rides with my parents, I would stare out the window, and, you know, if we were going to New Hampshire, you know, we'd be passing these woods, and I would see, you know, you'd see little openings, and I would think, oh, if I could jump out of the car right now, I bet that's a portal to somewhere else, you know, whether it's Narnia or, you know, someplace where I could go hang out with the Thundercats, wherever they lived, you know. Those things were very, very real to me. And so those books, you know, I wasn't huge into fantasy or sci-fi, but the Chronicles of Narnia really kind of established for me just like the basic possibilities of literature, and made something really, you know, it was both simple and very complex, but because it was a whole series, I really got to immerse myself in those worlds. And that's something I really recognize when kids or young readers gravitate towards series. Like, you're never going to find a more passionate audience, you know, than young readers or tweens. And like, they just want more. They want to spend more time there. And that is the greatest compliment I think you can give to a writer. And I've tried my hand at YA, and it went very badly. And I would, you know, rather die than share that deeply embarrassing attempt. But I admire people who write for kids so much, because it's such a gift. And the same thing with movies for young people. If you can give kids that amount of wonder and let them suspend their reality and let them feel all of those feelings, like you're a magician, and you're a really important person, because that's so exciting for kids.
Yes. And it is a very particular skill. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you either have that voice, or you don't. I don't know. I've done the same thing, and really, and I have kids and try to, you know, kind of resonate with what they do. And it's, you know, I just don't think I quite have that. But,
yeah. You know, and it's funny because I think it's probably, I mean, not that anyone's doing it on purpose, but it's kind of got to be slightly insulting to YA authors or even picture book authors, because so many people I know have thought, oh, I can do this. You know, I read my kids 3 books a night. You know, these books are 200 words. I got this down. And it's so hard. You know, like, these stories are deceptively simple, or, you know, it's really easy to come down like kind of moralizing with kids or beating some sort of lesson. And, you know, kids are really allergic to that, as they should be. You know, they just want a good story. They want to get lost. And, you know, I'm very proud that I wrote, you know, this, you know, 300 plus page memoir, but I'll be the first to admit that I cannot write a picture book. And I know, because I've tried. And, you know, let alone, you know, oh, I can write a book about vampires or blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sure. You probably can. That doesn't mean anyone's going to want to read it. And, you know, being able to tap into that really deep, you know, emotion that kids feel, and like how, you know, the stakes that feel so real for them. I think it's a real art. And I think that, you know, I hope these authors get some satisfaction when they see the rest of us trying and failing to do something that, you know, they're the people who've got that talent, and it should be reserved for them. Not that I would ever tell someone not to try, but I think that it's, you know, people kind of take it on without thinking it through as seriously as they should. It's just as serious as any other kind of writing.
Oh yeah, they're the real rock stars for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Anya, what did you decide to do as a career when you got out of school and headed out on your own?
It's like another Anya when I talk about this part of my life. So when I was in high school, the way that my storytelling impulse really showed itself was I really wanted to be an actor. And that was something I had done, pretty seriously in middle school and high school, and had been in some regional competitions. And it was the way that I loved telling stories. I liked taking other people's words and making them my own, and trying to be in that emotion and become a character. Then it just kind of got a little, not boring, but it just kind of got really frustrating to me. And it actually, I talk about this in the book. When my father passed away when I was 16, and he had been such a taskmaster about school, and I really associated him with my problems with school. And I had never taken my academics that seriously because I just felt that there was no point. I was never going to be a great student, so why bother trying? Put all my effort into creativity. And once he passed away, I thought, hey, maybe I can try. Maybe I can try doing well at school. Maybe I can try to not get C's. And I did, and I started doing better in school, and I found it enormously gratifying. And I all of a sudden found that I was super interested in European history and really interested in politics and government and kind of social sciences. So when I went into college, I pushed all of my creative impulses to the side, like just pretended they didn't exist at all. And I studied urban planning and urban studies, and I really thought that I was going to be the next Secretary of Education, and particularly cared a lot about urban education reform. And I had worked in some public schools in high school as a sex educator, so I'd really been exposed to all the different, types of public schools we had, and was really kind of disgusted to, travel from one town to another and see some schools have these incredible computer labs and other schools have zero computers in them. And it was just, just seeing that inequality was so upsetting to me. So I really dug into that and became obsessed with doing well in school. And my first year out of college, I won this fellowship with the New York City government that kind of was this, program for the best and brightest, take these young public servants and stick them into positions in city agencies that they are completely unqualified for. So I ended up being a part of the Administration for Children's Services, which of course, handles a lot of family services case, with kids either being removed from the home or trying to keep kids in the home, and work with families to make that home safer and better for everyone. And it was so fascinating, but I was just so out of my depth. I was 22 years old and, kind of helping draft policy for, people with social work degrees and people who were actually knocking on apartment doors at 3 a.m. And it was such wonderful and important work, but I felt correctly that I was really unqualified. And also, it was a real lesson in government is slow and change is slow. And that is a real tough pill to swallow for a young idealist. And that year, no surprise, my creative impulses started coming back, and I cared so much about what I was doing. But I also thought, what happened to this other person who loved telling stories and, thought that, public service is the most, one of the most important things you can do, but being a storyteller can also be really important. So when it came time to renew that contract, I thought, nope, this isn't for me. And I ran off to Zanzibar, this island off the coast of Tanzania.
Like you do.
Naturally, as one does.
Right.
I was kind of taking stock of my options, and I did, kind of the kind of dumb thing that only a 23-year-old would do, which is I sent an email to everyone I knew who all over the world. And I said, do you have something for me to do? So it could have been Zanzibar, it could have been Australia. And that's where I got the email back from. So I went to Zanzibar for 6 months and was working for a hotelier there who also did a lot of philanthropy. And that's where I started writing a novel. surprisingly about a young woman who was on Zanzibar during 9/11. I wonder where I got that idea.
A little on the nose.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's okay.
Right. And so I started doing that, and I just thought, this is right. I mean, the book was wrong in every sense of the word, but that's where I thought, okay, you can have these other passions and that these things are really important to you. But that's where I thought, you really did, you really suppressed this, like both an impulse, but also a desire that I had to communicate in this way. And so when I returned to America, I moved to LA and I just started writing there. And for a long time, I was waiting tables. It was perfect. I was cocktailing at night. I probably was making more money than I've ever made in my life, including since then, and writing during the day and taking a few writing classes. And that's really when I started to, both really invest the time and also, started being really curious, well, how viable is this as not even a career choice, but basically how good am I at this? And am I good enough, or do I have enough promise that this is worth pursuing? So I applied to graduate school and I got in and went back to do that in New York. And that was really, there's so much to say about getting your MFA, and it's not the right decision for everybody. And, in my case, it involved taking out a lot of loans that I'm still paying off. But it was absolutely the right choice for me. Really I was working part-time in magazines, while I was doing it. So I did have to work, but taking 2 years to really devote myself to writing and learning the craft was absolutely what I needed to do. And it also, helped me kind of get into the pipeline for teaching jobs at the college level, which has largely been how I've been supporting myself before I got the book deal for My Dead Parents. And it really kind of immersed me in this world where everyone I knew was writing, and that made it seem so much more like, an option if, if you were willing to put in the work and to understand that, it might not be your first or even your second project that hits, writing, like a lot of creative things, is a war of attrition.
Yeah.
And, that's something I really observed in grad school because, I went to school with a lot of incredibly talented people, but a number of them, kind of stick out in my mind as people who kind of showed up thinking, I've already learned, I already know everything. I'm really, to write my book, which the world is waiting for. And, just once I write the end, I'm done. And that's not really how it works. It's, for me, school gave me a chance to practice. It gave me a chance to make mistakes, like to spend months making mistakes, and writing and, refining stories that are never going to be read by anyone, because that's just a lot of the process. Not everything you write is going to be good enough, no matter, or it's so hard to use those words like good enough, but it's not going to be the right thing for people who are out there, or it's just going to be one step in what is a super long path to getting to the point where you're skilled enough to be able to write for kind of a larger audience. And so, a lot of the people that I felt were stars in my program, because they were absolutely really talented, like they kind of never ended up doing anything unless they were kind of secretly doing something. And I have no idea, but I think that, if you can have all the skill that you have, but if you don't have like the determination and the willingness to suffer all of the rejection and to slog through the years that it takes to write a book, you're not going to end up with it. It's if you don't have it, your skills are kind of useless. They're just you're not going to have the chance to show them off, because you're going to need all of these kind of other basic skills to get you to that point where you even have something to share. So that to me was one of the biggest things I learned in grad school, is that like, it's always kind of the beginning. You're not really sure where you are on your path, but wherever you are, there is still so much work in front of you. And that's always going to be the case. Writing your next book might be easier, but it's still going to take you years and if you aren't comfortable with that, or that doesn't work for your life or the way that you've structured your life, you're going to end up kind of torturing yourself.
Well, I always like to ask people about their career path and the things that happen before they become, quote unquote writers, because I don't believe there's any life experience that's wasted on a writer. And hearing you talk about working, with schools and kind of the administration side there, and then reading your memoir, My Dead Parents, do you feel like that time helped you to maybe tap into an empathetic side that then later helped you in the writing of the memoir?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I would say that, I've always been very empathetic, possibly to a fault, in that I feel other people's feelings or, for all I know, project my feelings onto other people. And, I feel them so deeply that, there are times that it can kind of almost become problematic in that I'll, make other people's feelings and emotional experiences more important than my own. I think more, while I was forced, or not forced, but, both, working, for the New York City Department of Children's Services, which might not even be what it's called anymore, or Administration for Children's Services. And then also all the travel I did, it did really expose me to, parts of the world I hadn't seen and parts of the world I hadn't considered, and certainly circumstances that were not familiar to me. And I think that as a writer, whether or not you realize if you're, consciously drawing on those experiences or not, just the more exposure you can have to the world, the better. You never know what is going to inform something. I did not end up finishing that novel about living on Zanzibar, but I think it was really important to spend time in another culture that was, deeply different than my own, and whether or not I write something about that specifically, I think the larger your worldview is, like, kind of in a sense, like the larger your audience is, because not all stories are universal. But I think something that I was really hoping with my memoir in particular is, most people have parents or, have parental figures, and everyone is going to lose them at some point. And I think, also just the feeling of, no matter how close you are to someone, and in my case, I was not very close to my parents, but even if you are or have other, parental figures that you're close to, there's always going to be a point where you feel like, wow, how well did I really know that person? Like, how deeply did I really consider the parts of their lives that didn't involve me, or the parts of their lives that happened before I even existed? How dimensional is this, is my view of this person? And, I think a lot of us are at some point, confront what I did, which is this person actually suddenly feels like a stranger to me. They've been in my life, the entire time, or at least until their death. But like, wow, I just didn't really allow them to be as like fully fleshed out of a human as I myself was, because they were kind of an accessory to my life, even if they had enormous power over it. And, again, when I think it comes to parents, you can have this deeply intimate relationship with someone where you feel like you know them so well and you've spent so much time with them, but then you step back and think, I don't even know kind of these basic things about them, or, our relationship was so focused on me, their job was to keep me alive, or to, kind of shepherd me through these, parts of my life until I became an adult. But I did not reciprocate, that level of attention on them. And I think that that's really natural for children. We are not supposed to worry about the adults in our lives. And if you are worrying about them a lot, that can indicate that something's wrong. But I think that, the parent-child relationship can be very, very one-sided. And while that can and should, make children feel really safe and make them feel like they're a priority, when you become an adult, you realize like, wow, I have no idea what it was like for my parent to be a teenager, let's say. And, when they were telling me when I was a teenager that I've been there, and, your reaction is, well, no, you haven't. There's no way. There's no way you could understand what I'm going through. I am the only teenager, me and my friends. And then you realize, oh shit, of course they were. And of course my parents, fell in love with someone they didn't marry, or had their heart broken, or, really wanted this job and they didn't get it, or, they had their own triumphs and they had their own losses. And I never really thought about that. And, hopefully, my book kind of, doesn't have a message, and I resist books that do, but I think one thing that I've heard people have taken away from it, and would be like a really wonderful for me, is if people realize, if their parents are still alive, like you have a chance to have those conversations now. That if you can spend time with your parents or, other important people in your life, and really spend time getting to know them and asking the questions that never occurred to you previously, I think that will just add so much to the relationship, and just, be something that you can keep with you forever, even after that person has died. So yeah.
I want to come back to that thought in a few minutes about memoirs needing to have a lesson, because I agree with you. I don't think that it's your experience that there's not. If you decided to turn this into a morality tale, I think it would lose something, because like great stories, we're able to kind of sift through it and maybe derive meaning on a lot of different levels. And sometimes it's a cautionary tale. Sometimes it's,
right.
A celebration of life, and sometimes it's a little of both. And I think most of our life stories are like that. We're complex people. And then, of course, the people around us are complex people, and peeling back those layers just, sometimes just gets more and more complicated. And, but the writing of this began as a blog, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. And your father passed away, I think you said, when you were 16, then your mother later. So you're going through your parents' stuff as, a lot of us that lose parents as the kids, we're tasked with kind of going through the pieces of our parents' lives. And a lot of times you find out things that you never knew, or and it's really weird, because I was this way with my grandparents when they passed away, that we got to go through a lot of their stuff, and you really get more of a three-dimensional picture of these people than you ever knew in life. And they were a certain thing to you then, and then your imagination just goes wild when you start, getting through all this other stuff. So why the blog? And am I correct when, in my, I think I heard that you, originally did the blog anonymously.
Yes, no, absolutely. So I think that, the whole process, or as you said, task of cleaning out, a parent's house or a grandparent's house is, kind of a really formative experience that once you mention doing it to someone, they'll have their own story. And the way you described it, was very true in my case. Part of it was just so banal, throwing out someone's clothing, or, why do they have this stack of newspapers, or just kind of, there's all this junk. But then there's also like incredibly intimate things, photographs, or, in my case, these letters that, really stopped me in my tracks, like quite literally. The cleaning out the house then took a whole extra week, because I was just sitting there reading these love letters that my parents had exchanged, and just thinking, I don't know the people who wrote these letters. Like the people I've decided that my parents were do not match up with the people who wrote these letters. I thought my father was very cold and unemotional, but his letters to my mother were gorgeous. I mean, I also realized that he was, an incredibly talented writer. And he was studied business and finance, and that's what he did with his life. But I mean, my mother's letters were very sweet and affectionate, but his were just pages and pages of what really felt like poetry. And it was so vulnerable and so passionate. And I just thought, my brain actually really kind of refused to process the information for a while. I just thought this is wrong somehow. Like someone planted these letters. Like there's no way that my dad wrote them. And then, for my mother to write her own letters or her responses to my dad's that were equally loving, their marriage to me was, from my perception, was actually really marked by a lack of love and a lack of affection. So to see what their relationship had once been was both deeply shocking and unsettling, and also very sad and very confusing. And so, when I went to clean out my mom's house, I felt very ready for the task, even though I knew it was going to be exhausting and frustrating and, physically demanding. I just thought, my father and I had such a bad relationship, and he'd been dead for 16 years. And then, my mother's alcoholism, it had been such a long road, and, one filled with so much pain and so much anxiety that, it truly was a relief, for me when she died, just in the fact that I knew that she wouldn't be suffering anymore. And she, for so long, I wanted to believe that, she was going to get better, or wake up one day and decide to quit drinking, or even, truly seek and commit to getting the help that she needed. And eventually it just became clear that wasn't going to happen. And while I kind of struggled to accept that, once I did, I just thought, okay, like, if this is what you're doing, you don't need to do this for another decade. And, my big fear was that she was going to seriously injure herself, maybe fall down the stairs, cause some kind of traumatic brain injury, and then, be kind of kept alive in a convalescent home for a decade. All of the options were bad. So honestly, dying in her sleep was the best of all bad options. And so I had kind of felt that my sister and I had suffered along with her at the end of her life. And so again, I kind of walked into her house feeling relieved and feeling really ready just to be done. I'm like done with my parents as if that's possible, which I realize now. And then, finding those letters really caused my approach to change completely. I'd been ready to kind of, clean my hands, push them away, and wipe my hands clean. And then instead I brought them closer, because I was so confounded by these letters and suddenly had so many questions, and for the first time in my life felt really interested in who my parents were, because I realized that they weren't who I decided they were and who I told myself they were. So I brought these letters and, kind of anything else that seemed important, my dad's high school yearbook, all of these photographs, work documents from, different points in their careers. And I brought them back with me to Brooklyn, and I was kind of sitting there staring these items down and kind of, interrogating them. And I just felt this impulse to write about it. And, my background was in fiction, and I didn't really know what I wanted to say or how to say it. So I started a Tumblr, which I called My Dead Parents, so the name ended up sticking, and I made it anonymous because I was, sharing documents, I was removing names from them, but I was scanning them or I was transcribing them. And so it was deeply personal information. And while I was, blogging from my own perspective, I have a sister, I have aunts, and it is their family too. And so I was very aware of both not wanting to make this deeply personal information public and traceable to them, but I also wanted the space to be able to say whatever I wanted and whatever I needed. And at that point, it was, both to kind of more publicly interrogate these love letters and say, this is so beautiful and so incredible. And like, I should be so lucky to have someone write these to me, but, kind of what the hell, like, how could my dad have been this person then? And then this person who I felt, had really terrorized me as a child. And I was also, really trying to explore my experience of grief, which felt, I don't know if there is a traditional experience, but I didn't feel deeply grieved or deeply bereaved. And I felt, a fair amount of pressure, having at that point lost both of my parents to be, super morose or depressed. And, I just didn't feel that way. And I wanted to be able to say that and to explore that and to say, or, to ask, both ask these questions of my parents, but to say, is something wrong with me? Am I doing this wrong? And why don't I grieve for my parents? And is that okay given our relationship? And so I was kind of doing that for years and discovering new things and reaching out to people here and there. But the blog was really limited by the scope that I kind of imposed on it, which was, kind of what was in front of me and how seriously I wanted to take it in terms of how much time could I spend on it? How much money was I willing to invest, traveling to meet people or to kind of try to unearth these different parts of my parents' lives. And the real turning point came when an editor from BuzzFeed, who I knew, asked me to write about my experience blogging. And I resisted the first call and I thought, oh, I don't really know if I want to do this. And then they asked me again and I thought, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm doing with this project. I've been working on it for 2 years. I have a decent audience, but I feel that I can't really take it much further with the tools and the opportunities I have. So I wrote the essay for them and at the last minute decided to attach my name to it because I just thought, I have this whole body of work, and while it's not my most polished writing or the writing I'm most proud of, I do want to claim it. And also, this is my family, and I want to claim this family, and I want to claim, my story and my experiences. So I worked on the essay for a few weeks, and then, as it was getting ready to go live, I, sent a really awkward email to my sister and to my dad's sister and said, hey, I've been anonymously blogging about our family for 2 years on the internet. And as of next week, it's not going to be anonymous anymore. So heads up, everyone's going to know these, know that I am the owner of these deep, dark thoughts. And this is all going to be traceable. And it was, really, really important to me that I let them know that this was happening, that they, I figured, it was totally possible that maybe, no one would read this essay or, tell them about it. But I hated the idea of them being surprised by it. And the best thing that could have happened, which is that they gave me their blessings. I mean, my sister is a very private person and does not have the impulse to share and tell stories that I do. So she definitely thought, okay, this is kind of weird. And I have no idea why anyone would want to share such personal thoughts and information with the world. But if that's what you need to do, go ahead. And my aunt had a similar reaction. And I was so lucky that that people, people out there in the ether really, really embraced the essay. And I got such a wonderful and, positive and encouraging response. And, then it kind of took on this life of its own where I had, not really been sure what to do with the project and how seriously I should take it. And then, these literary agents actually came to me. And that is kind of the best thing that can happen to a writer. I had done all this work, but I didn't have to formally query people and tell them about the project. All of these agents came to me and said, we really feel that there's a book here. We'd love to talk to you about it. And so I was living in LA at the time and I, hopped on a plane and, a few weeks later I was there back here in New York where I'd lived for a while, meeting with people and talking to them about the project. And then I settled on these two wonderful agents. And together we worked, on a book proposal, which took about, 5 or 6 months. That process alone was really hard, just, polishing chapters and trying to figure out what the arc would be. of the book, and trying to, figure out how can we write a book proposal when, this book is really an investigation and we don't know how it's going to end. And that was so much more true than I realized it would be. I did not know what I was going to learn. And so we finished up the proposal and we sent it out, and I was really lucky that this wonderful editor from Crown ended up buying it. And that really changed the project completely, because it let me, it was suddenly a book, and was a book I had to take seriously. And because I sold the project on proposal, which is different from fiction, with fiction, you need the complete book. I had some money up front that allowed me to travel and allowed me to take time off work. And so I could go to Ukraine and I could go to Wales, and I could, I spent a full year researching the book, which ended up being longer than I needed. I definitely over-researched the book, having no idea I was doing it. But I was, really, really concerned about talking to everyone and asking everyone every question I had. And what if there's this one person who has this great story and I can't find them, or this and that. And, I'm asking, interviewing families, or my family was pretty easy, but everyone else were strangers. I knew some of my parents' friends, but, I was going after their coworkers, their college roommates. And, these are people in their 70s or 80s. And so I'm working with their schedule and their memories and their illnesses. And I was juggling so much. So there was this huge wealth of material and, so many sources. But I was also kind of, fueled by this anxiety of, wanting to make sure that I really had exhausted all of the research and asked all of the questions I had, and had enough information to really be enough of an authority. I'm an authority on my own story as much as anyone can be, with memories, as much as you can trust memory and what time kind of does to them. But it was really important to me that I understood my parents enough to be able to speak to them, speak about them from a perspective that wasn't just my own, because I knew that it was limited and I knew it was biased. And the whole point of the project was to kind of challenge my biases and to force myself to be open, to see my parents as I hadn't been able to see them before. So I didn't know it at the time when I started the blog and was, sitting in my basement in Brooklyn, or, even blogging from China, where I spent a summer teaching. That was really, laying the groundwork for the book and working through kind of my most basic ideas about, how well can you know anyone, and how well can we trust our very, very limited views of our parents, when they're influenced by these very particular relationships. And, what can you learn from things like letters and photographs? And can you trust that as much as you trust your own opinion, or, an opinion of a stranger who you hadn't met before, but, if they were your dad's roommate, what they can tell you about someone that you didn't know at that period of their life is just as valuable as, your experience of them, and actually should be as valuable or more, because they're providing a perspective that you'll just never have on your own. So, the blog was it was a wonderful space to have just for myself to, write through my feelings. I'm absolutely one of those writers who feels that they need to write to discover how they feel. You start with a thought or a feeling, but then through writing about it, you discover these new colors and depths, and that thought leads you to this, realization where I wouldn't have gotten if I just was sitting thinking on my own. Writing is as much of a process as it is a product. And I really needed that time to kind of both sort through my thoughts, but also to kind of really figure out how viable this project was. And it gave me the confidence to both, feel that I had enough material and enough to say to be worthy of a book-length project, and the amount of research that I'd need to undertake to write that book. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, that's Anya. And the book is My Dead Parents. Excuse me. And it's available everywhere now. Anya, because excuse me, just a second. Excuse me. Because this book is such a personal book, and it's the book of your life and you discovering who your parents are. And like you said earlier, you're not preaching a certain message with the book. But what do you hope readers come away from this project with?
Well, gosh, I mean, I'm just so happy, that the book exists and that, people are interested in reading it. Like, that is the most wonderful thing that, can happen, and is incredibly gratifying when you feel that, this is, my story. So why would anyone be interested in it? But, as I said at the beginning, having parents is pretty universal. And, I think that, in a lot of ways, my book might be a slightly more difficult read for someone who was very, very close to their parents, because, I really talk about how that was, not the case for me. But because it wasn't the case for me, that meant that I had so much to learn about my parents and to really, challenge myself to be open to things. And I think that, everyone can benefit from that, even if, your dad is your best friend, or, whatever people say, that there's always something more to learn about the people in our lives. And the more that you can learn about them and make yourselves available to that information, the richer that relationship will be. And that relationship really continues even after they're dead. Your parents might die, but these humans will always be your parents. And in some way, you'll always have a relationship to them with them because they were the foundational relationship in your life. So you're always kind of living that relationship out in some way. And in my case, being open to my parents and, having the opportunity to research their lives to the extent that I did allowed me to see people who I previously had really had no compassion for with a great amount of compassion and understanding. And that is so wonderful to me. It really, again, this happened after my parents died, but it still transformed profoundly the relationship I had with them and have with them every day. Previously I just thought like, oh, thank God these people are gone from my life. Like, what a gift for me. And now it's in a lot of ways, the relationship is much harder in that, I have compassion for these people. I feel I understand how they became the people they did and why they were so complicated and why, the kind of the reasons behind their very real flaws. So, instead of just, hey, now I'm free, I never have to think of them. Now I think, there's much more pain. And in a lot of ways, there is more to grieve because I understand why my parents changed, and I understand, the choices they made or what happened to them. Of course, my mother didn't actively choose to, become an alcoholic, and no one would choose that terrible path from themselves if they felt that they really had a choice or could choose something else. But I understand why it happened, and it doesn't erase the difficult relationship I had with them, and it doesn't excuse, let's say, in the case of my father, like the way that he treated me, but it helps me understand why he did those things. And that, I hate the word healing, and it's such an icky word, and I don't want to rope people into what is a very personal healing process, but it was deeply healing for me in that it helped me again understand these things in my life. And I think everyone is entitled to, depending on their relationship with their parents, to be angry and to stick with that anger and to make that choice. But for me, learning what I did and finding this compassion for my parents really allowed me to let go of certain anger and allowed me to kind of, love my parents not as my parents and the people they were, but just as humans, and as humans who were mostly trying their best and trying really hard. And even if their efforts sucked sometimes or came out really terribly wrong, being able to kind of love them in that way really left me with kind of a feeling of peace and at least a resolution that kind of helped me settle kind of a lifetime of strife with them, and including after their death. You know, I still kind of felt like my horns were locked with them, even though they were gone. And so that to me was wonderful. And I do think that, you know, again, there are some people that maybe feel that people in their lives should not be forgiven or do not deserve to be understood. And that's fine. And of course, I would never talk anyone out of that. But for me, I think if people can look at what I did and say like, you know, it is worth at least trying to understand someone that I'd felt was not understandable, or to have sympathy or empathy for someone that I thought didn't deserve it. Like, that is, you know, that's a gift that you're giving to yourself, or it's allowing, you know, yourself to kind of heal pain, because it's, you know, these are kind of all very vaguely like Buddhist concepts, which I can speak about with zero authority, but, you know, just the whole idea that like anger only hurts you. It doesn't hurt the other person. It can, or how you behave to the other person, but you're not giving in by releasing anger. You're not letting someone else win. If you stay angry at them, it can feel like that. But actually it is such a relief to let that go and to think, all right, I don't have to be, you know, at odds with this person for the rest of my life. You know, I can actively choose or actively try to rework that relationship and come to a place of understanding that, you know, even if it isn't healing, is just simply much more pleasant on a day-to-day basis. And I think for me in particular, I was also very wed to this idea that I was a victim of my parents. Even as an adult, you know, I was still a victim of, you know, the way my dad treated me and how that resulted in low self-esteem. Or even though, of course, my mother didn't become an alcoholic to cause me pain, and in no way wanted, you know, her children to suffer because of it, I felt like a victim of her actions and her behavior. And that just wasn't serving me any longer. And I also just got to the point of thinking like, honey, you're 40. Are you going to blame your parents forever? Like, at some point you got to step in and say, sure, this stuff happened, but like, you're in charge now. And so to me, that was really great. But you know, and again, I'm sorry, I know my answers have just been so long and winding. But I think part of that's the product of just having sat with this material for years. You know, there's the year of research, and then there's the years you spend writing and rewriting and new thoughts and new ideas and new conclusions. And so to me, like, being able to understand these really huge figures in your life, regardless of what the relationship was, is really something worth giving yourself, you know, whether or not the relationship is wonderful or whether, you know, it was terrible, that there's just something to be gained from trying to look at people with fresh eyes and from a perspective other than that of a child, you know, especially as you become an adult. I think that that's really like a worthy pursuit for anyone.
I love it. Anya, the book is My Dead Parents. It's available everywhere. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of it. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Hank. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be able to have this conversation, and I'm so thrilled to, you know, be among the authors that are lucky enough to speak with you on your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to put a link to your website in the show notes. Is there anywhere else people can connect with you?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, I'm on it. So I'd love for people to reach out. You know, connecting with my readers is such a privilege for me. So any way you reach out, I'll reach back.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anya, and I wish you much success on the book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I was 10 years old when I saw my first ghost. The year was 1770. My father was a barber. He kept a small shop at the Kuenhoven Inn, where the King's Road met the Old Loop. Our modest home lay to the north, between the inn and the hanging tree. A simple box of pine boards whitewashed with crushed oyster shell, one room with a spinning wheel for mother, a chair for father, and up a ladder of branches, a garret where my parents slept. I slept on the floor below, alongside my little brother, Hans, 5 years younger than I. Our floor sloped toward the Hudson, so that when Hans rolled over in his sleep, he often went on rolling and couldn't stop, collecting splinters and grievances. Yet on this particular night, he slept peacefully, and I was the fitful one. A mouse had taken shelter in our wall, fleeing the October chill. It scritched and scratched, nibbling a nest for itself. The sound thrilled me. I possessed a vivid mind, full of toadstools and bullfrogs and lightning storms, and so imagined a skeleton writhed in the wood. The bones of Anne Underhill, perhaps, murdered by Indians at Spook Rock. I'd heard that tale from my father, who reveled in the Dutch superstitions. He would gather us to fireside on winter nights and spin tales of the Heer of Dunderberg, that storm king who rattled our white windows, of the Lady of Raven Rock, who died in snowfall, pining for her lover, of trolls beneath the penny bridge and hobgoblins in the hanging tree. He'd filled my head with such dark romance that I lay waiting for Anne's little finger bones to drag me off to some bloody fate. I rather hoped she would. A cloud cleared the moon, and a square of light fell on my mother's spinning wheel. The sharp spindle glinted, and the wheel began to turn, without touch. A figure appeared before me, as through a mist. A gray head bent to the work. She fixed me with eyes black as open graves and whispered in a low, guttural hiss, "Spin, or you shall not eat." I cried out and fell to my pallet, arms over my head. Hans awoke, lost his balance, and rolled away, bleating with pain as he struck the riverside wall. Father emerged above. "Agatha, what is wrong?" "There's a ghost, Papa. A ghost! Help me!" Hans laughed despite his bruises, and Mother moaned and ordered us to sleep. But Papa descended and took my hands, his blue eyes twinkling. "What did you see?" "An old woman. She said, 'Spin, or you shall not eat.'" "Oh!" He raised a candle beneath his chin. "You saw old Willow. She lived here long ago, when this was the home of Isaac Hart, our candle maker. Her husband was killed by savages. Hart took her in at the request of Lord Phillips, who paid a token sum for her upkeep. But Hart was greedy and kept the money for himself. He never fed her unless she spun. So Willow spun and spun and spun, like a spider, year by year, growing old and blind and falling to waste. She died at that spinning wheel, fell over one day, and the spindle pierced her heart." Hans screamed and hid beneath the table. Mother appeared above. "Daniel Van Ripper, you are a fool!" I kissed Papa's fingers, for I loathed that spinning wheel. I'd be no toothless ghost, spinning and haunting little girls. I felt pity for such a spirit, and gratitude to have her example before me, steeling my resolve. Every night thereafter, I would leave a crust of bread for old Willow and sleep with one eye open, in case she came to spin for me again.